They say some warriors were born unbroken, not just in body, but in soul. They lived among shadow and flame. They vanished into forests like ghosts. The Kiowa knew the land, and the land knew them back. But they had companions even older than words. Horses. Not tools. Not transport. Kin. Spirit-bound. A good horse doesn't just follow, it chooses. And one horse chose no one. Until the day it did. They called him Wind Wing. His rider was taken. The settlers thought they'd broken the beast. But there are some spirits that can't be broken, only misunderstood. And one day, a boy with no words met a horse with no master. And the wind changed direction. The prairie stretched endlessly under the wide blue sky, a sea of tall grass swaying in the summer wind. On the horizon, red cliffs stood like ancient guardians, their shadows stretching long and dark as the sun lowered toward evening. Among the people of the Kiowa, a boy named Tokuma grew into the rhythm of this land. He was the son of a respected warrior, and even as a child, his eyes carried the same sharp focus as the falcon that circled above the campfires. He listened to the elders speak of spirits, of battles, and of horses, the sacred gift that gave the Kiowa speed and strength. One morning, Tokuma wandered farther than usual, following the whisper of the wind through the grass. The silence was broken by a frantic sound, a high, desperate cry carried on the breeze. He followed it and soon found a small clearing where a wild foal stood trembling, cornered by a pack of gray wolves. The young horse was thin, its legs shaking, its eyes wide with fear. The wolves circled closer, their teeth flashing in the sun. Tokuma's heart pounded, but he did not hesitate. With a cry that echoed across the plain, he rushed forward, waving his spear and shouting. The wolves snarled, snapping at him, but the boy's determination and sudden attack scattered them into the grass. The foal, still trembling, stood frozen in place, its white-marked forehead catching the last rays of the setting sun. Slowly, Tokuma lowered his spear, speaking softly, his voice carrying the calmness of the prairie after a storm. The foal stepped back at first, unsure, but Tokuma's steady presence was different from the chaos of the wolves. Inch by inch, he approached, holding out his hand as though offering nothing but trust. The horse's ears flicked nervously, yet it did not run. That night, under the rising stars, Tokuma guided the foal back toward the Kiowa camp. The people gathered around, curious at the sight. Children pointed, elders whispered, and the warriors studied the animal with sharp eyes. The boy told the story of the wolves and how the spirits of the land seemed to have guided him to the foal. The shaman listened in silence, then placed a hand on Tokuma's shoulder. "This one," he said, "was given to you by the wind. It will carry a name, Nico, Wing of the Wind." From that night forward, the bond between boy and horse began. Tokuma fed him with his own share of food, brushed his thin coat, and sang to him beneath the stars. The foal grew strong under his care, running in circles near the camp, his mane tossing like clouds before a storm. Tokuma's laughter followed him, echoing through the prairie. The other boys admired the young warrior's courage but also envied the connection he had with the animal. Horses were the heart of the Kiowa, and this one seemed touched by something greater, something beyond simple luck. Elders spoke of destiny, of the way the spirit sometimes tied a life to another. As seasons changed, Nico began to follow Tokuma everywhere, through rivers, across hunting grounds, and into the heart of the campfire's glow. Where the boy went, the horse was close behind. Their lives had twined together like threads in a single braid, too tightly woven to ever be separated. It was only the beginning of their story, but already the camp whispered of it. The prairie had given Tokuma a gift, and in return, he had given Nico a reason to live. Together, they would ride into the songs of their people, two souls bound by wind and fate. Years passed, and the boy became a man. Tokuma grew tall and broad-shouldered, his once youthful face now marked by the fire of battles and the quiet strength of discipline. Around his neck he wore a necklace of carved bone, a token of his father, while red paint marked his cheekbones during ceremonies. He was no longer the child who had faced wolves, he was a warrior of the Kiowa, swift and unyielding. By his side was Nico. No longer the trembling foal of that night, he had transformed into a powerful Mustang whose muscles rippled beneath his copper coat. His mane, long and black, streamed like a banner when he ran. The white star on his forehead seemed to shine whenever he thundered across the plains. Together, horse and rider became a living symbol of courage. The Kiowa celebrated their bond in stories and songs. Elders spoke of the way Nico ran with the storm winds, never tiring, never faltering. Young men watched Tokuma mount his steed with a grace that seemed more spirit than flesh, and they envied the unity between them. To the tribe, it was as though Nico and Tokuma shared a single heartbeat. On hunts, they were unstoppable. Nico would surge forward like lightning, carrying Tokuma close to the herds of bison. His arrows flew true, guided by steady hands and the rhythm of hooves pounding the earth. The tribe feasted because of their skill, and the boy who once rescued a frightened foal now stood at the heart of his people's survival. But it was in moments of battle that their legend grew strongest. When rival bands threatened, Tokuma led the charge, Nico leaping over obstacles with fierce precision. Dust clouds rose behind them, arrows sliced the air, and the sound of war cries shook the prairie. The Mustang never faltered, the warrior never doubted. Their courage lit the spirits of the Kiowa, and even enemies whispered of the pair with wary respect. At night, around the great fire, Tokuma would sit with Nico close by. He would brush his coat, whisper to him as though the horse understood every word. And perhaps he did, for Nico would lower his head, eyes calm, as if listening to the secrets of a brother. Sometimes the shaman joined them, speaking of omens. "The wind carries your names together," he told Tokuma. "Where you ride, the spirits follow." The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a copper glow across the prairie. Tokuma rode Nico along a narrow trail that wound between the cliffs and the open grasslands. The Kiowa had sent him as a messenger, carrying words of trade to a distant encampment. His bow was slung across his back, a quiver of arrows at his side, and his thoughts were calm. Nico's hooves struck the earth with steady rhythm, each beat like a heartbeat in the silence of the land. But silence is fragile. Ahead, dust rose into the air, an approaching group. Tokuma slowed his horse and narrowed his eyes. A column of wagons and riders emerged from the haze, their clothes foreign, their rifles gleaming in the light. White settlers. For a moment, both sides simply stared, the wind carrying the heavy stillness between them. Tokuma raised his hand in greeting, as was the way of his people. He called out, his voice firm but not hostile. Yet suspicion had already taken root in the settlers' eyes. Their hands tightened on their rifles, their horses stamped nervously. One shouted words Tokuma could not understand, but the tone was sharp, filled with distrust. Nico snorted, sensing the tension. Tokuma's hand tightened on the reins, urging calm. He tried again, gesturing toward the plains, hoping to pass without conflict. But the moment cracked. A rifle fired, whether by accident or intent, it did not matter. The shot echoed against the cliffs, shattering the fragile peace. Chaos exploded. Settlers shouted, horses reared, and more gunfire roared. Tokuma wheeled Nico aside, arrows already in his hand. He loosed one, then another, each finding its mark with unerring precision. Nico moved like the wind itself, leaping across rocks, circling enemies with the swiftness of a storm. Dust and smoke filled the air, cries of pain and fury mixing with the thunder of hooves. But even the strongest warrior cannot outrun fate. A bullet struck Tokuma in the chest, driving him back in the saddle. His breath caught, his vision blurred. Nico barked, rearing in protest, his eyes wild with fear and rage. He carried Tokuma away from the clash, hooves pounding furiously across the ground. For a moment, it seemed he might outrun death itself. But Tokuma's strength failed. He slipped from the saddle, falling to the earth as the life drained from his eyes. The Mustang circled back, nudging his fallen rider with his muzzle, whinnying in grief. But the settlers closed in, surrounding the horse with ropes and shouts. Nico fought like a storm, rearing, kicking, snapping the lines. Yet the numbers were too many. They dragged him down, bound him with chains, and led him away as a prize. Behind them, Tokuma's body lay still on the prairie, the setting sun bathing him in crimson light. His spirit, the Kiowa would later say, rose with the wind that night, carried into the stars. And Nico, the wind's wing, was torn from the heart of his people, carried into a world of iron and dust. The Mustang was led in chains to a small farmstead on the edge of the Texas plains. The settlers who captured him believed they had won a valuable prize, a horse strong enough to work their land and perhaps even to carry them into battle if need arose. But they did not understand Nico. His spirit had been forged by the wind, tempered by the hunt, and bound to the heart of a fallen warrior. No man could claim him so easily. When they tried to break him, he fought with fury. Grown men with ropes and whips entered the corral, but Nico lashed out with his hooves, rearing high enough to send them scattering. He bit through leather straps, tore apart wooden rails, and left more than one man limping away with bruises. His eyes blazed with untamed fire, and his cry echoed across the valley like a storm refusing to be chained. The settlers cursed him, calling him a demon horse. Some wanted to sell him off, others to put him down before he injured someone. But the farmer hesitated. He saw power in the Mustang, something that could not be replaced so easily. So the horse remained, though locked behind strong fences, and watched with wary eyes. Among those eyes was a boy's, 10-year-old Samuel, or simply Sam. Where the adults saw danger, Sam saw loneliness. He would stand by the fence, small hands gripping the wood, watching Nico pace in restless circles. He remembered the stories his mother whispered at night about wild creatures that carried the spirit of the land, and he wondered if this horse was one of them. Sam began to approach in secret. At first, Nico pinned his ears back, teeth bared, hooves stamping the earth. But the boy did not carry a whip, nor did he shout. Instead, he held out small gifts, apples from the orchard, slices of corn bread stolen from the kitchen. His voice was soft when he spoke, gentle as a lullaby. Days turned into weeks. The boy returned again and again, sitting quietly near the fence, speaking as though the horse were listening. And perhaps he was, for Nico began to lower his head, ears flicking with curiosity rather than anger. The fire in his eyes dimmed to a wary glow. The first touch came on a still evening. Sam stretched out his hand, trembling with hope. Nico flared his nostrils, breathing in the scent of the boy. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, slowly, the horse's muzzle brushed against the small palm. Sam laughed aloud, the sound breaking into the sky like a bird taking flight. From then on, a fragile trust began to grow. Sam would brush Nico's mane with clumsy hands, whisper to him about his dreams, and sit beneath the stars with the Mustang standing guard. Though the horse still lashed out at others, with the boy he was different, cautious, but no longer furious. The farmer shook his head at the sight, muttering that the boy was foolish. Yet even he could not deny what was happening. Where grown men had failed with force, a child was succeeding with patience. In the quiet bond between a wild Mustang and a boy, something unspoken stirred. Nico had lost one rider to death, yet here was another, small, fragile, but fearless in his own way. Destiny, it seemed, had not abandoned the wind's wing after all. The first ride happened by accident. Sam had been brushing Nico's mane, humming softly to himself, when the horse lowered his head and stilled, as if waiting. Heart pounding, the boy placed one bare foot against the wooden fence and pulled himself up. For a moment, he sat on Nico's back, hardly daring to breathe. The Mustang did not buck or rear, he simply stood, ears flicking, testing the weight of the boy. Then, without warning, Nico surged forward. Sam clutched the coarse mane, holding on with all his strength as the world blurred around him. The wind tore through his hair, the ground thundered beneath them, and a laugh burst from his chest. The boy was not afraid, he felt free, more alive than ever before. When Nico finally slowed, Sam slid down, his legs trembling, his face alight with joy. From that day on, the horse allowed him to ride. Their days together became inseparable. At dawn, when the farm was still quiet, Sam would sneak away to the pasture. Nico would greet him with a toss of his head, eager to run. They raced across the meadows, splashed through shallow streams, and vanished into the tall grass where no one else dared follow. The boys' laughter mingled with the Mustang's whinnies, echoing across the land like a song of freedom. To Sam, Nico was no longer just a horse. He was a companion, a confidant, a guardian. At night, when storms rattled the windows of the farmhouse, Sam would whisper his secrets to the horse, believing Nico understood. Sometimes, it seemed the Mustang did, for he would press his muzzle gently against the boy's shoulder, steady as a promise. But Nico was not tamed, not truly. His spirit remained wild, his eyes always scanning the horizon. There were moments when Sam could feel the distance, as though the horse's heart beat to a rhythm older and greater than the farm. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the open prairie, Nico would lift his head and stand motionless, nostrils flaring, ears pricked toward memories unseen. Still, the bond between them deepened. Sam learned to guide Nico with the lightest touch, to move with him instead of against him. The settlers marveled, shaking their heads in disbelief that the fierce Mustang, untouchable by grown men, had become gentle under a child's hand. Even Sam's father, once convinced the horse was cursed, began to respect the boy's quiet victory. One evening, after a long ride, Sam slid from Nico's back and sat in the grass, watching the sunset stain the horizon with gold and crimson. "You're my best friend," he whispered. Nico lowered his head, his dark eyes reflecting the dying light. In that moment, the boy felt certain the horse carried more than muscle and bone. He carried memory, a story older than Sam could imagine. The prairie, however, does not forget. The winds carried scents and echoes, whispering to Nico of the past he had lost. Though he stood beside Sam, loyal and steady, something within him stirred whenever the breeze shifted. The boy saw only a friend. But the Mustang's heart belonged to two worlds, the farm, and the vast, endless freedom beyond. And so their friendship grew, not as a chain but as a fragile bridge between wildness and trust. It was a bond unshaken by fear, born not of force but of patience and love. Yet deep within, the call of the prairie waited, a voice neither horse nor boy could silence forever. The summer sun burned high over the plains, and the air shimmered with heat. Sam urged Nico forward along a narrow trail that wound through the tall grass. The boy had grown more confident in his riding, guiding the Mustang with little more than a shift of weight or a gentle tug on the reins. He laughed freely, hair flying in the wind, while Nico galloped with the grace of something born of storms. But this day was different. The wind carried a strange scent, faint yet sharp, smoke, sage, and the lingering memory of drums. Nico's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. His stride faltered. Sam frowned, patting the horse's neck. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But the Mustang's muscles trembled with tension. His dark eye scanned the horizon, wide and restless. As they passed a rocky outcrop, Nico suddenly halted. His body stiffened, every nerve alive. The boy clung to the mane, startled by the sudden stop. Then, without warning, the horse reared, tossing Sam violently to the ground. The boy cried out, the breath knocked from his chest, and rolled into the grass. By the time he staggered to his knees, Nico was already running. His hooves struck like thunder, churning up dust as he bolted across the open plain. Sam shouted after him, voice breaking, but the Mustang did not look back. The boy's figure grew smaller and smaller until the prairie swallowed him. Nico ran as though the earth itself called him home. The scents grew stronger with each mile, smoke from campfires, hides stretched to dry, the faint traces of painted bodies moving beneath the sun. He knew these smells, they belonged to his past, to the people who had once surrounded him with song and battle cries. Hours passed in a blur of wind and memory. The land itself seemed to shift, guiding his hooves. The rolling grass gave way to distant teepees scattered across a valley, their painted hides glowing in the late light. Smoke curled into the sky, and voices carried through the air, voices he knew but had not heard in years. At the edge of the camp, figures emerged. Warriors paused, children pointed, women gasped. The elders stepped forward slowly, their eyes wide with recognition. They saw the white mark on the Mustang's forehead, the flowing mane that had once carried their fallen warrior. "Nico," someone whispered, as though the wind had spoken the name. The horse slowed, circling at the edge of the camp, uncertain. Yet when an old man reached out with trembling hands and spoke softly in the Kiowa tongue, Nico lowered his head. They touched his muzzle, their voices heavy with sorrow and reverence. The Mustang's heart beat widely, torn between the past and the present. Behind him, far away, Sam sat on the grass, clutching his ribs, eyes fixed on the horizon. He felt the emptiness as if something inside him had been ripped away. He whispered the horse's name into the silence, not knowing if he would ever see his friend again. And on the wind, two worlds collided, the memory of a fallen warrior, and the fragile love of a boy. Nico had returned to his people, yet his heart remained divided. The prairie had called him home, but the question lingered, where did he truly belong? The camp stirred with wonder as Nico stepped closer, his powerful frame outlined by the evening sun. Warriors gathered, their faces painted in red and black, their braids tied with feathers. Women whispered his name, children clung to their mothers, and elders raised their hands in reverence. They had thought the Mustang lost forever, taken by the settlers when Tokuma fell. Yet here he was, returned from the world beyond, like a spirit walking among them. An old warrior stepped forward, his shoulders draped with a bison hide cloak. His voice shook as he spoke, "This is Tokuma's horse. This is Wind's Wing." The others nodded, remembering the young warrior who had once ridden Nico into battle, swift as thunder, fierce as fire. The people surrounded him, not with ropes or whips, but with open hands. Some stroked his mane, others pressed their foreheads to his flank as if greeting an old friend. The shaman came last, carrying a staff adorned with eagle feathers. He touched Nico's forehead, whispering words that only the spirits understood. The horse stood still, ears flicking, as though listening. For a time, Nico wandered the camp freely. He drank from the river, sniffed the painted teepee, and watched the people move with the same rhythm he had known as a foal. The smell of smoke, the sound of drums, the voices singing around the fires, everything was familiar. The memories of his youth returned in flashes, Tokuma's laughter, the pounding of hooves during the hunt, the heat of battle when they rode as one. That night, a fire burned in the center of the camp. The Kiowa gathered to honor the horse's return. Warriors told stories of Tokuma, recalling his bravery and the bond he shared with Nico. Women sang songs of sorrow and pride, their voices rising to the stars. Children sat wide-eyed, listening to the tale of the boy who had saved a foal from wolves, who had grown into a warrior whose spirit now lived among them. Nico stood near the flames, his white-marked forehead glowing in the firelight. The people danced around him, painted bodies leaping in rhythm with the drums. Yet even as the celebration swelled, the Mustang's gaze drifted toward the horizon. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, his nostrils flared at the memory of another scent, the boy who had fed him apples, who had whispered secrets in the night. The Kiowa believed Tokuma's spirit had guided Nico home, and perhaps it was true. But the horse's heart was no longer bound to one world alone. When the fire died low and the camp fell into sleep, Nico lifted his head to the sky. The wind stirred, carrying with it the voices of the prairie, and in that whisper he heard two names, Tokuma and Sam. As the first light of dawn touched the plains, Nico stepped to the edge of the camp. The warriors who watched him did not try to stop him. They understood. A horse, like a man, follows the call of his own spirit. And Nico's spirit was divided between two homes. With a final glance at the campfires fading behind him, Nico turned toward the horizon. The prairie stretched before him, vast and endless, carrying him back toward the boy who waited with hope and sorrow in his heart. The prairie was still when Nico returned. The wind carried the scent of dust and wheat fields, and in the distance the small farmhouse stood against the morning light. Sam sat near the fence where the Mustang had once been kept, his knees pulled to his chest, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights. He had searched, called, and waited, but the boy feared his friend was gone forever. Then came the sound of hooves. Sam lifted his head, hardly daring to believe. Out of the haze, Nico appeared, mane flying, chest heaving, his white-marked forehead catching the sunrise. The boy leapt to his feet, heart hammering, and ran forward. "Nico," he shouted, his voice breaking with relief. The Mustang slowed, lowering his head as Sam threw his arms around his neck. Tears streamed down the boy's face as he clung tightly, whispering over and over, "You came back. You came back." Nico stood steady, warm and solid, his breath rising in soft clouds. In that moment, the bond between them felt unbreakable, stronger than fences, stronger than distance. Life on the farm returned to its rhythm, but nothing was the same. Sam and Nico became inseparable again, though the boy noticed something in the horse's eyes that had not been there before. When the prairie winds blew, Nico would pause, ears flicking, gaze drifting toward the horizon. Sam understood. The horse carried another world inside him, a world of warriors, drums, and a boy named Tokuma who would never ride again. Yet Nico stayed. Each morning he greeted Sam with a nudge, each evening he carried him across the meadows. Though his spirit longed for the freedom of the plains, he chose to remain beside the boy who had shown him kindness when no one else would. Years later, when Sam grew tall and strong, he often remembered that first ride, the wild gallop, the wind tearing past, the feeling of being part of something greater. And every time he looked at Nico, he felt the echo of Tokuma's legacy. The Mustang was not just a horse, he was a bridge between worlds, carrying both sorrow and hope in his stride. Among the Kiowa, the story spread like fire. Elders told of Nico, the wind's wing, who had once carried Tokuma and returned to them as a spirit of loyalty. They spoke, too, of how he chose a new rider, a boy who had no blood tie to their people but carried the same courage in his heart. Around the fires, they would say, "A horse may change its path, but its heart chooses the rider." His story became legend of a foal saved from wolves, a warrior fallen in battle, a boy's patience, and a spirit that belonged to both prairie and hearth. And in every gust of wind that swept the plains, the Kiowa believed they could hear him still, the pounding of hooves, the whisper of freedom, the song of the wind's wing.